Yeah, I'm gonna wait on the camera in 4Ks. So I did get all these fairly early. I did get The Abyss and True Lies, I think the day of the release, and I only had to wait 1 day for Aliens. So I'm kind of lucky on that. I watched them, I had my thoughts. I started to watch other people review them. There was a lot of up and down. There are those that, probably rightfully so, do not like them. And there are those that say, you know what, it's good enough. And there are those that say, no, actually, it's fantastic. And this does feel kind of confusing. I do agree with Jeff Rouso, sorry, Jeff, from Films at Home. Um, there are things to nitpick, and there are things that are, yeah, not great, but this is the highest resolution we're going to get or have gotten. But it's also like, how seriously do we take this? And but at the same time, I do agree with Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. That's his handle. I'm not throwing shade. Where he's pretty much just, this is upsetting. And he kind of takes it to a level of like boycotting. But it is something to discuss. There's something here. There's a reason why this starts to bother us. So I thought I'd at least throw my whatever in here. After watching them, there are things that, yeah, I don't like. And I've tried to sit and think, do I have like, critical bias where, one, Terminator 2 just was upsetting to me. It's one of my favorite movies. And that 4K release was just appalling. So, yeah, I was kind of going into this thinking, okay, I need to look for what's bad in this. And I'd already seen the early reviews, people talking about the digital noise reduction and some of the waxy appearances, especially for True Lies, and just the complete obliteration of all grain. So this got me, I don't know, tuning in more, trying to look for things, paying more attention to it, and I tried to pull myself back from that and watch these just to watch them. Now, things did still stand out to me. With Aliens, they seriously obliterated all grain in this movie. The digital noise reduction just flat out got rid of things, but it's weird in how it's done. And this is something that is kind of consistent across all three. They've removed the digital noise and film grain, but it seems like it's still active in the background. But when it's like over a person's face, nothing. And one thing that did really stick out to me a lot is the over sharpening. And I think maybe it's a part of whatever AI program they have going, that it tended to focus more on facial detail, but the AI program or software that they have does not know how to computate motion blur. So it doesn't know how to compensate for detail in motion. And one thing that really stood out first, in the earliest scenes, is you could see great detail across Sigourney Weaver, her whole face, and then when she started talking, all of this area, like below the bottom lip and the chin area, like a little V, was just a big blur. It was just constant, smooth, weird, soft, no detail. And then when she stopped talking, hyper detail. And that was just jarring. I don't think there's any waxy appearance in Aliens other than Paul Reiser, but Paul Reiser kind of looks like that. And the hyper sharpening that is inconsistent with motion, the lack of any kind of noise or grain on a character, but then some slight noise or grain in the background. And that could be a part of digitally re-adding some kind of grain or digital noise. I think there was too much play with the color grading, and it seemed a little bit more high contrast, maybe more saturation, or maybe it's just the HDR. I sometimes have weird feelings about HDR. And in the earlier scenes, especially on the ship, when they're addressing the Marines, it just feels too clean and bright and even. But overall, when you get into the later scenes, when there's more hard light, low-key lighting, it's darker, then it looks beautiful. If the film looks great once you get to the second half or the whole third act, and the whole nest scene with the Queen, great. The scene in the air vents with the flares going off and everything's red, great. But it's the first part where things are more bright and evenly lit. But then I don't know how much of that was me already trying to look for what's wrong with this release. Now, True Lies, on the other hand, this one... Now, I've heard the rumors that this is from an older scan, potentially one for Blu-ray, that was never released, that has then been upscaled in AI, that has been DNR'd in some areas, but then not in others, and has, out of all three, the most inconsistent look when it comes to film grain.
I knew it.
There are times where it's obliterated, and one of the most jarring things stands out probably the most in the first dinner scene with Arnold and Jamie Lee Curtis, and then the diner scene with Jamie Lee Curtis and Simon, or Bill Paxton. When it comes to a close-up shot of Jamie Lee Curtis, there's still a lot of grain, and you can see it, and it's kind of soft on her face, but then you cut to Arnold or Bill Paxton, and it's hyper-sharpened. That was very jarring to me. And it could be, maybe that's in the film itself. There was a thing back in the day where they would pull the focus a little bit just to make it softer features on females. So maybe that was a thing that Cameron did during the filming of True Lies, but it's only really noticeable in those two scenes. Any other time with Jamie Lee Curtis, there is a lot of detail and no noise or blur on her face. So maybe it's just something with the film scan itself. And True Lies is the one that has the most, what everybody is saying is the waxy look that is reminiscent of Terminator 2. Now we want to give some kind of cop-out because we don't want to say DNR did it, Department of Natural Resources. But True Lies does have a lot of that look, and it's something, and I've seen some other reviewers talk about how it's not so much just the DNR, but it's a whole processing thing. It is over-processed. Now this is very similar, from what I see, to something you might come across if you just happen to open up Facebook and look through it, if you're maybe an old person or a young person who's taking a poop and you need something to do. You've probably scrolled down and seen some of these images of like, oh, then and now, these celebrities, what they looked like in 1995 and what they look like now. And they look almost like an AI image. But they are real images, they've just been over-processed. Now, I have done a lot of work in photography and videography, and I have done noise reduction, I've done sharpening, I've worked with a lot of different softwares. When you try to remove noise or grain, it's going to remove detail. So then you want to go in afterwards and try to sharpen things up. If you try to sharpen before removing that, then you're just going to make the noise or the grain more prominent. So you denoise, then go in and sharpen, then you try to do some other things and just make it look more natural, and it's still going to come out somewhat a little off. And that's what a lot of the waxiness looks like, because you'll see very smooth textures across like a forehead, but then very sharp edges in detail around like the creases in the forehead, the little lines, wrinkles, if you will. And it's probably the most prominent on Tom Arnold, a little bit on Arnold himself. But those two characters in True Lies is where you see it the most. And then you go to the trailer scene where they cut off the back half of Simon's trailer to break in, and whoa, you get flooded with grain. It is very much still there. So it's very inconsistent in what they removed, and it seems like the AI is trying to remove grain around faces and characters, and then in some scenes they just don't remove it at all. Maybe they couldn't without losing a lot of detail. I don't know. It's I don't know. Better than the DVD, I guess. But it is upsetting that you're like, why can we not just get a normal looking movie? So I get the feelings from both sides. Yes, we've been waiting a long time to get this level of definition from True Lies. A long time. So I would say of the three, True Lies is probably the worst. But it's not overly bad. It's not Terminator 2 level.
Oh, no.
It is over-processed.
Sweet Jesus, Harry, you surely screwed the pooch last night, didn't you?
Now The Abyss. The Abyss has needed a new release for a long time. But it's not like we've been deprived of a whole lot. The DVD still had good quality. I actually just watched this last year, and I was like, that still looks good. I'd love to see it in high def, at least 1080. But this is a great picture. and you get all kinds of extra features. Even though I now have the Abyss 4K, which does have a lot of special features, 4K resolution, and a Blu-ray with 1080, I'm still going to hold on to this DVD. The 4K does have less of all these issues. You can definitely see that there has been noise reduction, but it probably has the most consistent noise added back in. But it doesn't go into over brightening, it doesn't go into over contrast, over sharpening, some over sharpening in a few places, but it kind of looks the most consistent across the whole movie. It still has not a flat picture, but it's not overly contrasty or saturated. It's fairly well decent. It's a decent picture. Of all three, this is the best looking. And I think that's been the most consistent thing across all the reviews. Everybody agrees this one looks better. And I'd say that's not an issue with The Abyss. One thing I can say is a good thing about all of these releases, they definitely come with a lot of special features per release. And True Lies even has a new making of documentary with some somewhat new interviews. Now, I know the last Blu-ray release of Aliens had some special features, and I don't think everything that's on the new 4K release, but I'm fairly certain if you have the old Alien Anthology, this like 2011, 2010, this has so many special features for every Alien movie that honestly, like every couple of years, I'll just sit down and I'll fall asleep after like 10 hours of watching this and it's still playing. So maybe I'll just point out that here's 4 things you'll now notice in the 4K release of Aliens. Public hairs, that ship, the rear projection, these pipes. I hope you had fun with that. Here's 7 things you now notice in the 4K release of True Lies. Tom Arnold's pale lips, squib outlines. That's not Arnold. That's not Arnold. That's not Arnold. Cameron has false colors. And that's not Arnold. So those are my thoughts. When it comes down to it, did you like the movie? Did you watch it? Could you sit down and have a good time? And I think that's where I'm at with it. Alright, I don't know how to end this one. Just go have fun.